The wind had a way of telling stories on the high desert, whispering through the mesquite and over the sandstone, cliffs like some old spirit wandering between worlds. And on that strange, blistering afternoon, it carried a sound Jedediah Cole had never heard before in all his years riding the frontier. Thin, muffled cries, almost like the whimper of an injured fawn, but threaded with something human, something desperate, something wrong. He reined in his gelding atop a ridge overlooking Dead Man's Hollow and narrowed his eyes, wondering why the air felt so heavy, why even the birds seemed to hold their breath, as if the land itself was bracing for a terrible revelation. Jed, a rancher by trade and a reluctant hero by nature, had spent most of his life avoiding trouble where he could, mending fences, breaking horses, and keeping to himself after the wars between settlers and tribes had taken too many good men on all sides. But destiny has a way of dragging even the quietest souls into storms they never asked for. As he nudged his horse forward, he noticed boot tracks in the dirt, fresh, too fresh, and a set of wagon ruts that cut like scars toward the southern edge of the canyon. And though every instinct in him said to turn back toward the safety of his ranch, something else, something deeper and older, maybe the voice of his late mother who taught him that a man who ignores another's suffering ceases to be a man at all, pushed him onward. The cries grew clearer the closer he rode, and the wind shifted, carrying with it the bitter smell of fire and sweat and something sickly that churned his stomach. He slid from the saddle, tied off the reins, and moved forward on foot, his boots crunching softly over the dry earth. As he crouched behind a cluster of boulders and peered into the hollow below, that was when he saw them. 5 young Apache girls, no more than 12 to 16, strung up upside down from a crude wooden frame built between 2 dying juniper trees, their wrists bound, their long hair sweeping the dirt, their faces flushed red from the blood pooling downward. They trembled, whimpering, yet clung to life with a kind of fierce, quiet courage that struck Jed straight in the heart like a hammer blow. Surrounding them was a group of 5 men, hard, mean-eyed scavengers he recognized from wanted posters in Tombstone and Bisbee, led by a brute named Lorne Cutter, a bandit famous for preying on isolated homesteads and anyone too weak to defend themselves. Cutter moved with the swagger of someone who had never known consequence, never known fear, and he laughed with his men as if this cruelty were nothing more than sport. On a lazy afternoon, Jed felt his jaw tighten until his teeth ached. He'd seen men do terrible things in the past, but this was a sickness that couldn't be ignored. Still, bursting in without a plan would get him and the girls killed, and he knew Cutter would shoot first and brag about it later. So Jed crouched lower, studying the terrain, noting the position of the men, the one warming his hands by the fire, the one cleaning his rifle, the one pacing like a restless coyote, and Cutter himself leaning on a post while bragging about some raid he planned to lead at first light. Jed's heartbeat thudded, like a drum in his ears as he scanned for any sign of why the girls had been taken. Nearby, he saw broken pottery, discarded baskets, and the remnants of a small Apache campsite, signs of a peaceful traveling family ambushed without warning. Rage flared hot inside him, but he tempered it, forcing himself to breathe slow, to think like a man who had survived the darkest corners of the frontier. He inched closer, listening through the dry grass as Cutter mocked the girls' tribe, saying the men had run like cowards into the hills and that these 5 were payment for the trouble. Jed felt something inside him snap, something quiet, something steady, something that didn't allow him to walk away. He knew he had to intervene, but saving 5 lives against 5 armed men meant he needed more than brute force. He needed strategy, timing, and the element of surprise. The sun was dipping toward the horizon, stretching long shadows across the sand, and he knew dusk would be his best ally. He backed away to his horse, whispering a soft command, as he retrieved the rifle from the saddlebag and loaded it with practiced efficiency, his fingers steady despite the fire burning in his chest. As he waited for the light to fade, Jed studied every angle of the hollow, every rock he could use for cover, every moment when the bandits looked away or drank from their flasks. He prayed silently, something he hadn't done in years, not for himself, but for the girls who hung helpless and terrified. When the first sliver of moon crested the canyon rim and the bandits' laughter softened into idle conversation, Jed began his descent. Every careful step felt like a thread pulled tighter on fate's loom. He slid from rock to rock, moving like a shadow, the ground cool beneath his palms. One of the bandits, Lewis, if Jed remembered the old poster, right, wandered off to relieve himself behind a thicket. Perfect. Jed followed silently, waited until the man was alone, and struck fast, knocking him unconscious, with the butt of his rifle before, dragging him behind a fallen log. 1 down, 4 to go. He returned to the hollow's edge and watched as Cutter barked orders, telling his men they'd move at dawn. This gave Jed the narrow window he needed. He crawled forward until he was close enough to hear the girl's ragged breathing. The oldest girl, maybe 16, fought to lift her head enough to see him, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. Jed put his finger to his lips, signaling silence. She blinked once, trusting him, or at least hoping he wasn't another monster. Jed steadied his rifle and fired a single, sharp shot into the air behind the hollow, echoing off the rocks like a distant rider approaching. The bandits jumped, grabbing their weapons, shouting curses as they scrambled to locate the source. Cutter sent 2 of his men up the ridge to investigate, leaving only himself and another near the girls. Jed circled to higher ground, positioning himself behind a boulder overlooking the frame where the girls hung. He took a breath, aimed carefully, and fired, dropping the man near Cutter before the bandit even knew what hit him. Chaos erupted. Cutter dove for cover, shouting at his remaining men still scattered along the ridge. Jed wasted no time. He sprinted toward the girls as bullets kicked up dirt around him. Using his knife, he slashed the ropes one by one, lowering each girl carefully. The youngest sobbed softly as she touched the ground, her legs shaking violently, but Jed lifted her with one arm and motioned for the others to crawl behind the rocks. Cutter roared with fury when he realized what Jed was doing, firing blindly as he stormed toward them. Jed fired back, forcing Cutter to take cover behind the wagon. The remaining 2 bandits on the ridge opened fire, pinning Jed down. He grit his teeth. This was the moment he had feared. He was outnumbered, outpositioned, and the girls were too weak to run. But something unexpected happened. From the shadows of the canyon, faint movement appeared. 3 Apache men, silent as the night, slipping from behind the rocks with bows drawn. They must have been following the kidnappers for hours, waiting for a chance to strike. Their arrows flew fast and true, taking down one of the ridge gunmen and scattering the other. Jed met their eyes for only a second, but it was enough to understand. They weren't allies by pact, just by necessity. Cutter realized he was alone now, his men down, his escape cut off. He tried to mount his horse, but Jed rushed him, slamming into him with the force of a man who carried both fury and righteousness in his bones. The 2 men grappled in the dirt, kicking up dust as they fought, Cutter swinging wild, Jed focused and unyielding. At last, Jed landed a blow that sent Cutter sprawling at the base of the juniper frame he had built for torture. Cutter spat blood, reached for a hidden knife, but Jed was faster. In a final, decisive motion, he disarmed the bandit and pinned him to the ground. Cutter stared up at him with hatred, but for the first time in his life, also fear. Jed didn't kill him. No, that wasn't the kind of man he was. Instead, he bound Cutter's hands and feet with his own rope and let the Apache men decide his fate, stepping aside with a nod of respect as they approached. The girls, though weak and trembling, watched from behind Jed with tearful relief. As the moon climbed higher and the canyon finally exhaled its long-held tension, Jed looked at the 5 young lives he had saved and felt something shift deep inside him, an unspoken vow that this was only the beginning, that the world held too many shadows and too many predators, and that maybe, just maybe, he was meant to shine light in places that had known only darkness. And as the quiet night settled over the hollow, Jed Cole realized he was no longer just a rancher. He was a man walking a path that would change everything.